Welcome to the Bhagavata podcast. I'm Måns Guru, a senior lecturer at Åbo Academy University in Finland and a senior research fellow at the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies. I'll be a host for this podcast inspired by the work of the Gaudiya Studies research project at the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies. This podcast is a series of discussions on chapters of the Bhagavata Purana, a classic text of Vaishnava philosophy, sacred law, and profound ritual traditions. What makes this podcast unique? Every guest here is not only a trained scholar of Indology and related disciplines, but also a dedicated Vaishnava practitioner. This blend of rigorous academic scholarship and lived devotion allows us to explore the Bhagavata Purana through a rare and insightful lens. Here, theology is not just theory, it is scholarship in dialogue with faith. And to honor that, my guests and I will embrace Vaishnava tradition fully, including wearing the sacred marks of the tradition and using our Vaishnava names. Thank you for joining us for the Bhagavata podcast. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurinmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. My name is Prabhupada Das, and I'm very fortunate today to be joined by Sripad Krishna Kshetra Swami Maharaj. Welcome, Maharaj.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, especially with you, talking about this very special topic indeed.
Yes, I think this is one of the most wonderful texts in all of perhaps all of the books that are available for mankind, and that's something that we will try to show in this podcast. We reached the second chapter. The first chapter introduced the setting of the kind of frame story of the Bhagavatam, Sutta and the sages. And the sages put 6 questions to Sutta. And I think, and I might be mistaken here, but I think Maharaj, Sutta is going to answer the 4 first of those questions in this chapter. Is that correct?
He's going to answer, yes, I think 4 of the questions. I don't remember if they're exactly in the same order as the questions are given, but yes, 4 out of the 6 questions. We might want to say, though, that his answers are the beginning of much more expanded answers. He's kind of giving the short answer, and then they will be expanded in the course of the entire Bhagavatam.
Why do you think the book does this? I mean, it seems that most of the theology, most of the philosophy of the Bhagavatam is explained through questions and answers, and the answers don't always seem to address the questions directly also.
Yeah. Yes, I found that sometimes, it can be a bit challenging sometimes to follow what's going on. I think one explanation that's come up for this is that it's like any conversation we are likely to have with anyone. We do tend to kind of jump around. We don't, when we're just talking with people, it's not a formal thing. So a thought comes that takes us in one tangent, takes us then in another tangent. I would say also, though, the Bhagavatam does have a structure. It has actually a few structures kind of on top of each other. But you were saying, for example, that the first chapter is setting the scene. And in a way, we could say that the whole first skanda, the first canto, is setting the scene, right? And so there's a kind of what I like to call a spiral structure of expanding themes giving a brief introduction, then a bit greater expansion, then even more expansion.
Do you think, Maharaj, that this has to do with different types of listeners or readers as well? That the text is providing the reason for why the text is providing different answers like this, or different forms of answers?
Yeah, of course, it could be that. The Bhagavata Purana is a Purana, and we understand that this particular genre is intended to be for a wider audience, as the Mahabharata is, but then the Bhagavata Purana, of course, has a special focus, and at the same time, it wants to keep this, I say it, it's kind of like, how to put it, the personality of the book, the book Bhagavatam, has a kind of intentionality of its own. It sometimes seems. So, yes, possibly for different audiences, different readers. In literary theory, I've come across the idea of the ideal reader, that an author will write something with an idea in his or her mind of an ideal reader, someone who is best equipped. So it's an interesting thing to reflect on. Is there, first of all, just one kind of ideal reader for the Bhagavatam? We hear from the very first opening verses in the first chapter, Nirmatsaranam Satam, right? The Bhagavatam is for those who are free from envy, at which point some of us might feel like, well, then it's not for me, because I'm not free from envy. But there's so much that encourages us to continue reading or hearing.
Here in the second chapter, one of the things that I find interesting is how Sutta, after being questioned by the sages and being honored by their questions, he doesn't go directly into the answers, but rather he begins by offering his respect to his own teacher and to a whole number of persons. Do you have any thoughts about this?
Well, yes. I would say, first of all, he's showing very explicitly the process of receiving the Bhagavatam. He's acknowledging this is not something that I've, as we say in English, cooked up myself. And he's also acknowledging the vertical dimension of bhakti. Here I'm kind of echoing the late Joseph O'Connell, who was a scholar of especially Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and sometimes he would speak about there being vertical bhakti and horizontal bhakti. And so I think here, in offering his respects to Shuka, the transcendental parrot, the son of Vyasa, he's acknowledging the vertical dimension, and not just acknowledging but celebrating, because his description in those, I think it's 2 verses of Shuka is it's very charming, and even within those descriptions, not only do you get a picture of the character of Shuka, we often refer to as Shukadeva, although it usually, when he speaks, it's usually Sri Shuka Uvacha. Not only do we get a sense of his character, his devotional, renounced character, but we get a sense of what are the some of the core values of the Bhagavatam as a whole. I was thinking the other day, maybe one way to think about, well, not just this chapter, maybe the early chapters of this first canto, is in musical terms. We might think of the Bhagavatam as a whole as a kind of grand symphony, a 12-part symphony. And as is maybe typically the case in symphonic music, some of the musical themes will be set out in the very beginning, in a short way, in an overture. And then the themes will be elaborated and explored in so many different ways in the course of the symphony. So an important theme is being set just in those very first verses of the second chapter, the offering of respect to Shuka.
This is beautiful, and I hadn't thought about this example of a symphony, but it makes a lot of sense. Especially, and I'm thinking maybe of particular types of music, but how themes can come back then, and this kind of There's even a few verses that are repeated verbatim throughout the Bhagavatam.
Yeah. Yes.
In a way, we have, one of the beautiful things about the Bhagavatam, but perhaps also one of the challenging things about the Bhagavatam is that the story is so non-linear. We begin with this outermost frame of Shaunaka and Sutta and the sages at Naimisharanya, and eventually we're going to go into kind of sub-story of that and sub-stories of that and so on. Within those different levels, we're going to jump back and forth in temporal history.
Yeah, you have to keep on your toes when you're hearing or reading Bhagavatam.
And you also need to have somebody to read it with. And perhaps that's one of the themes that comes up here, that Sutta is glorifying Shuka, his teacher, the parrot. I find it quite interesting that Shuka's name is the parrot. He's the one who is parroting the Bhagavatam in a sense, but adding, of course, a lot on his own as well, adding flavor. But then so many more layers will be revealed, and here I'm also wondering, we could say that the Bhagavatam it begins in a sense here with Sutta and the sages, but it's going to begin again then with Parikshit and Shuka later on, and it's going to begin again with Maitreya and Vidura, and it's going to begin again with Narayana and so on. But if we look at beginnings from a different perspective, I wanted to ask you, Maharaj, because you, of course, one of the things that you are famous for or well known for within the community of scholars is that you've worked on the Bhagavatam extensively together with Ravi Gupta, Radhika Raman, and on your own as well.
Mm.
Today, from the perspective of scholarship, is there a consensus about the beginning of the Bhagavatam from a kind of historical point of view? When was this text composed?
Oh, consensus. Good luck. Yeah. I think the the best explanation of the very many theories of when it was composed was done by Edwin Bryant in an article which was published some years ago in Journal of Vaishnava Studies. And he covers the whole gamut from very early to very late, even up. One estimate is the latest, I think, is 16th or 17th, I don't remember, 16th century of the Common Era, going back to, I don't remember now, 16th century before the Common Era. So, 3,000 years of estimates. But then he kind of analyzes them and weighs them, how reasonable the estimates are. And he's very good at that sort of thing. His doctoral dissertation was a similar exercise in a different area. And he finally comes to the conclusion, which he doesn't say is, absolute. He just says a reasonable guesstimate is that it's from, as I remember, 4th or 5th century of the Common Era, so he wants to put it in the Gupta period. Now, the traditionalists, of course, will not be happy with this, but I think it's interesting to know that Bhaktivinoda Thakur, very much a traditionalist, kind of played with the idea of comparing or dating the Bhagavatam in relation to the modern historical methods. And of course, it was, you could say, just an experiment, and I don't know how much he himself took it seriously. But he talks about this in his introduction to the Sri Krishna Samhita. And he says, well, scholars are estimating the date of the Bhagavatam to roughly 1000 Common Era. And he tries to show how it could be 100 years earlier. What? Only 100 years earlier? Well, he's working back according to the history of certain kings, which are mentioned in the Bhagavatams. But in the end, 1 or 2 paragraphs later, I think, he says, in any case, we understand the Bhagavatam is timeless. It is beyond time. And this, I think, is maybe also interesting when you mention it seems to have so many beginnings. One of the articles that Radhika Raman Prabhu and I were able to publish in the collection of articles, the Bhagavata Purana, Sacred Texts and Living Tradition, was by the late Rick Jarrow. He wrote a very nice article on time in the Bhagavatam, and he makes the point that what the Bhagavatam wants to say is indeed that the Bhagavatam has no beginning. There are so many beginnings, but those are just really continuations.
So I guess from what you're saying, we could then perhaps think that the particular year when the text was written down doesn't really matter so much. Then that it's a revelation that is perhaps in some way ongoing.
Yeah, this is the sense that, of course, the historians always want history in terms of our essentially modern notion of history. But the mood in which the Bhagavatam has been composed, we can say is radically different. It has a very different sort of intention. And also related to this, Advayajnana Goswami sometimes has made this point that the Puranas are being highly selective of history with the intention of telling what's important. So they go over ages and eons of unlimited events, and one needs to be selective if one wants to draw some higher wisdom out of that history. Yeah.
So here in the second chapter, after glorifying his preceptor and Narayana and Narayan Rishi and Saraswati and so on, Sutta begins answering the questions, and I think the first question was something like, "What is preeminently good for mankind?" He starts answering these questions. Were there any particular verses that struck you when you reread this chapter, Maharaj?
Well, the famous one that's responding to that, of course, is verse number 6. Savai pungsang paro dharmo yato bhaktir adhokshage ahaituki aprati hata yayatma suprasidati, which packs really a lot into it, because it goes to the principle of dharma, which was introduced in the first chapter, verse 2, dharma projita kaitavotra, right? We're going to reject any kaitava dharma. And in a sense, this verse is encapsulating the opposite of kaitava dharma. And so I think, again, this is kind of setting the scene and giving a musical theme, if you like. What is this highest dharma? It's bhakti. It's devotion to the Lord, and then he gives qualifications. What does that mean? It's haituki, it's without cause, hetu, and it's apratihata, it's not interrupted. So that's a pretty radical notion right there. To be without motivation, free from, selfish motivation, and to be constantly engaged. That means this is about something quite serious. And he gives the results, what we can look forward to if we do this. Yayatma suprasidati, not only prasidati, but suprasidati. There's great satisfaction for the self, for oneself, say. So I've always found this to be a very nice sort of compass that kind of echoes through the whole Bhagavatam. What do you think about? What is your take on this, Riguji?
Well, I mean, there are many quotable verses here in this chapter, I think.
Yes.
I think I remember seeing there are many of these shloka books, of course, books with collected verses. And I remember seeing one with verses from the Bhagavatam, and I think at least every second verse of this second chapter was included there.
Right.
So many verses. But this one that you mentioned, it sets a very high standard you mentioned the qualification of the listeners as being nirmatsaranam satam, those the good people or saintly people who are without envy. And here it said that bhakti is uninterrupted, which is quite a tall order. I'm not 100% sure how to take that. I mean, theoretically, of course, I can understand what that means, that bhakti is not kind of on the back burner, something that we do now and then.
Weekend hobby.
Yeah, but it's something that pervades our life all the time. But what that means in practical terms, I'm not so sure.
Well, that's the sort of thing that gets expanded, I would say, in the Bhagavatam. We read about the different Bhagavatas. It's called, of course, it's called Bhagavata Purana because Bhagavata with the long first A indicates that it's in relation to Bhagavan with a short A, first A. And what is in relation with Bhagavan is not so much what, but who are in relation are the Bhagavatas. So one way to appreciate the Bhagavata Purana is to see how it's kind of zeroing in, focusing on specific Bhagavatas. And in this canto, we'll have a closer look at Vasudeva, at Narada, Kunti, Bhishma, and who else? Parikshit, of course. Yeah, and briefly Shuka. So you can say your question, all right, how to apply this? I think this is one of the ways that the Bhagavatam teaches that. It's also going to teach in a very, prescriptive way in some passages. I'm thinking of Narada in Canto 7, speaking about Varna, Ashrama, Dharma. And also Krishna in 11th Canto, speaking to Uddhava. He goes into a lot of detail there about the practice of bhakti. Yeah, that's what comes to my mind.
I like that very much, and the focusing on the persons of the Bhagavatam, the Bhagavatas. I think that's a very fruitful way of reading the text as well. Here we have a discussion between Sutta and the sages, and there's going to be so many discussions in the text, and so many times when somebody starts praying or asking questions, answering questions, it's very kind of dialogical. And I remember the first time I read the Bhagavatam with Prabhupada's commentaries and in the back of the Sankirtan van, I would sometimes get bored with all these prayers, especially. But now Daksha is going to pray, and now Ritu is going to pray, and they will all say things like, "Oh, my Lord, you are beyond the three gunas, and from you comes Krishna." But my Sankirtan leader, he said something very good to me, and he said that whenever you read these kind of things, try to see how the personality of the speaker is reflected in what they say, and that works. You start to see that this is why Daksha is saying this. This is why Maharaj Prithu is saying this.
Yeah,
They may have some themes that come up quite a lot, but then there are these particular kind of personal aspects that come in as well.
Yes, and I've also heard from, I have to say again, the late Gopi Paranadhana Prabhu, who was really quite an accomplished Sanskritist. He said just about this, he said, you can also see differences in style in the Sanskrit. Of course, when there's translation, as the saying goes, lost in translation, there may be things that are not so easily notable in that respect.
That's one thing that I would like to see somebody do, would be to translate the Bhagavatam in a way where the different styles of Sanskrit would be visible in the translation as well. But we have so many different meters, for example, that are used.
There is one devotee in Poland who has started a big project of translating the entire Bhagavatam in Polish verse.
So then we just need to learn Polish first.
That's right. Yes.
No, but I'm interested in this because I think the translations that are available, and particularly Prabhupada's translation, of course, which is so widely available and so extremely helpful on many different levels.
Mm.
This kind of aspect of the poetry and the different styles of the language of the Bhagavatam doesn't come across so clearly. And I think this is something that would be nice if it could be somehow, as you say, things get lost in translation, but perhaps it would be possible to bring a little bit more of that out in some way.
Yeah. When Radhika Raman and I worked on our translation, we did selections from the Bhagavatam from each of the 12 cantos. Roughly 10% of the entire text we translated from the Sanskrit, and it was incredibly interesting and, of course, challenging and illuminating, and it was also fun because we worked very much together. We went back and forth on so many verses discussing. So we tried our best to bring out what we could, and of course it's a kind of ongoing discovery. What's really an endless possibilities. One thought I had also on translation in the English language, what's called the King James version of the Bible is, of course, a translation of the Bible into English, but it's regarded as English literature. It has been extremely influential to the literary history of English language. So that sort of thing can also be there for translating the Bhagavatam.
As you know, I'm working on the Hari Bhakti Vilasa, which is a ritual text, but particularly in the 10th chapter of the Hari Bhakti Vilasa, Sanatana Goswami, the author, is citing so many Bhagavatam verses. And one of the interesting things about those verses is that he will almost always start out with the commentary of Sridhara, which he generally will reproduce more or less verbatim. But then he might add some things within Sridhara's commentary, or then more commonly after he's given Sridhara's commentary, he will then add some more kind of layers of understanding. That this word Uttama Shloka, for example, which Sridhara takes to mean this, can also mean this. And then usually he's bringing out more kind of Vraja and Krishna-centered understandings.
Yes.
Did you and Radhikaraman, did you look a lot at these traditional commentaries when you translated the text?
Yes, we did. Sometimes more, sometimes less. We maybe not as much as we would have liked to, because we were under publisher's contract to finish a book within a certain amount of time. But of course, the commentaries are there, and we included as a kind of 13th chapter to our book 4 essays. Initially, we had the idea to just select 4 verses from the Bhagavatam and then give straight translation of one of the commentaries to the given verse. But we realized that's not really so easily represented. As you know, commentary it's a special way of writing. So we wrote essays in which we highlighted different features of not just one, but more than one commentary on a particular verse or a particular passage, to try to give a sense of that dimension of the Bhagavatam, the commentarial dimension.
Now, this tradition of Bhagavatam commentaries, of course, is an ongoing tradition as well, and Prabhupada commentary or his purports is, of course, a modern example of a Bhagavatam commentary. How would you characterize Prabhupada's commentary in comparison to earlier modern commentaries?
That's a good question. It's from seeing both, I would say in general, 2 things. Prabhupada is generally much more elaborate, where the traditional commentaries, for the most part, will be very succinct. And this, of course, is for a reason. He knows he's writing for a very wide audience, and he's writing for an audience who have usually very little or no background whatsoever in the tradition which the Bhagavatam represents. So he knows he needs to explain many things. And keeping that kind of, you can see he's always keeping his audience very much in mind. And he's also very much, he's not keeping back. Sometimes he's very polemical. He against Mayavadi and Shunyavada, Mayavada and Shunyavada, and so on. He's very often being, very exhortative. And he's exhorting his reader to act in certain ways, to become devotees, and so on. So it's quite different I would say, in those respects. Do you see also, of course, he will quote sometimes, or he will paraphrase commentary, and he will also sometimes weave a gloss of a word into the translation, so you get commentary within translation. Again, because he's anticipating who is his audience, and he wants to make very sure that they understand how to read. Do you see yourself other things to compare?
I think what you just said sums very nicely up what Prabhupada is doing. This thing of how he's mixing translation and commentary, that's something that some people get upset about. But I think it's very close to what the traditional or the pre-modern commentators are doing, because the commentaries that they give are usually more like glosses, really kind of explaining how to read the verses. So they already translate the verses in a way, and many of these kind of expanded translations that Prabhupada has, when you read them and you're surprised that how can he say that this word means that. Oftentimes he's taking exactly Sridhara's or usually Sridhara's gloss for a word and just putting it in the translation. One thing that I'm wondering about when we're speaking about these early chapters or the whole first book or the first canto, is that Prabhupada wrote these commentaries when he was still in India.
Mm-hmm.
He did write them in English, of course, and they were a little bit then edited for, the language was edited later on after he had come to America, but I don't think the contents were changed very much. But do you think that already here he's having an international audience in mind?
Yes, I've always felt that he had an international audience in mind from the beginning. He was advised by a friend when he was preparing his Back to Godhead magazines in the early, maybe in the 50s. I don't remember if he mentions his name, but someone had advised him to write books instead of magazine. And Prabhupada thought that's a very good idea because books are more permanent. And I think he was anticipating. We understand he had this order from his guru to write in English, and he was anticipating that he would eventually travel west. That's my sense, at least.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, his English in those, especially first canto, is it's charming. It's quaint. It was edited quite a bit as he wanted. But it's sometimes nice to read that original. It's very sweet. Another verse going back to the second chapter that I think is very much celebrated is verse number 11. Varanti tattva vidas tattvam yajnanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti Bhagavaniti shabdyate. And this is sort of setting out Advayajnana, non-dual knowledge, which kind of surprises some readers because we're thinking, no, we're not non-dualists. Those are the Advaitins, right? And we don't have anything to do with them. But Srila Jiva Goswami, in his Sandarbhas, he puts a lot of attention on this particular verse to elaborate what is meant by Advayajnana, and this Advaya aspect is never abandoned. It's rather, he shows how it has these three aspects: Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. And that becomes a sort of theologically foundational verse, I think, for the entire Bhagavatam.
The Bhagavatam, of course, as you said earlier, is mainly focused on that which relates to Bhagavan. So we might wonder here then that it's interesting that the Supreme is designated as Advaya Jnana Tattva, but also then that these two aspects are so important, Brahman and Paramatma. Why do you think they are mentioned here instead of just going directly for Bhagavan straight here in the beginning?
To Bhagavan.
Yes.
Let's not waste our time with this Brahman business. I would think it's one aspect of the Bhagavatam is its Catholicity, its appeal to everyone, its inclusiveness. And there are many verses in the Bhagavatam that can be taken in a, what we might want to say, impersonal way, or quite non-dualist way. And it seems to me that's intentional. There's a kind of intentional ambiguity. But I would say another reason is just because it's recognizing there are these three aspects of this Advaya Jnana Tattva. And the Bhagavatam is, one of the features of canonicity, one scholar has explained, is that a text or a collection of texts proposed to be all-inclusive. Everything that is to be known is to be found in the canon. And so the Bhagavatam, I think, is doing that. And one way to, going back to Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, as you know, in his, that very first essay he wrote, the Bhagavata, its theology, ethics, and philosophy, that's called. He makes this perhaps hyperbolic statement that if all the Vedic literature, except for the Bhagavatam, would be burned, I think he compares it to the Library of Alexandria. He says, if it would all be burned except for the Bhagavatam, there would actually be no loss.
I don't think he's just exaggerating here. There is, when we get into more of these chapters here, we're going to see how so many of the different threads of the Indian scriptural canon have been woven into this text.
Yes.
And
the intertextuality.
yes. Like there'll be almost. You don't have to have read very much of the Upanishads, for example, to recognize almost direct quotes from them.
Yes.
Yoga Sutra and so many other texts are found in the Bhagavatam. So this second verse that you mentioned, the 11th verse, about the topic of the text, the like Satyam Param, the first verse. That's another of the famous verses in this chapter. Are there any other verses that we should mention here before finishing our conversation? Okay.
There's just a little mini series. It starts with verse number 16 and goes through 20, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 verses, which are describing the progress, how to practice, how to progress in bhakti. And kind of stepping back before going into the verses, thinking about this a couple of days ago reminded me that the scholar of Indian philosophy, Karl Potter, in one of his books makes a distinction between what he called progress philosophy and leap philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Leap in the sense of jumping or getting a sudden realization. And I find that an interesting kind of typology. And my impression is that the Bhagavatam emphasizes progress, and the step-by-step progression. And it seems to me that's being set out as a kind of theme here, or implied in this little series of verses. So maybe, do you have the text in front of you? Maybe you want to read.
I don't have it in front of me, but I have the feeling that you do, Maharaj.
Yes, I do. Okay. I'll read Srila Prabhupada's translation of verse 16. O twice-born sages, by serving those devotees who are completely freed from all vice, great service is done. By such service, one gains affinity for hearing the messages of Vasudeva. And then Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who is the Paramatman in everyone's heart, and the benefactor of the truthful devotee, cleanses desire for material enjoyment from the heart of the devotee, who has developed the urge to hear his messages, which are in themselves virtuous when properly heard and chanted. So first it's introducing service to the Mahat, and then it goes to hearing, and it's identifying where is the Lord. Hridi Antasta, he's situated in the heart, and he acts as a result of his hearing. What is that acting? Vidhunoti, he purifies, he cleanses the heart. And then comes, and this is the BBT translation, by regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam, and by rendering of service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed, and loving service under the personality of Godhead, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. So there is this Naishtiki Bhakti speaking. So we get here also a kind of, I think we could say, an anticipation of Rupa Goswami's sort of ladder of progress. Ado Shraddha Tata Sadhu Sangota Tato Bhajana Kriya, and so on. And this seems to speak about Nishta. Yeah, and then the next one, verse 19, as soon as irrevocable loving service is established in the heart, the effects of nature's modes of passion and ignorance, such as lust, desire, and hankering, kama, lobha, adaya, disappear from the heart. Then the devotee is established in goodness, stitam sattve, and he becomes completely happy, prasidhati, prasidhati, not aspirated. So there's this progression that's it's setting out. And of course, this is going to be so much elaborated, well, especially in the 11th canto. And finally, this 20th verse, thus established in the mode of unalloyed goodness, the man whose mind has been enlivened by contact with devotional service, prasanna manasa, to the Lord gains positive scientific knowledge. Srila Prabhupada wanted to emphasize that it's a scientific process of the personality of Godhead in the stage of liberation from all material association, mukta sangasya jayate. Yeah, so that's encapsulating, you could say, the process of bhakti, abhideya, according to the Chaitanya Charitamrita terminology. So I thought those are good to highlight.
That's beautiful, and perhaps then for the perfect listener or the perfect reader, then you could set aside the book by now. That
say, okay, I
you
got it
would-
now.
yeah. But I'll have to maybe read a few more chapters to get it all. But
Yeah.
this is I think it's very nice that you highlighted these verses, Maharaj, because this is really kind of in a nutshell so much of what is going to be expanded on throughout the whole text. This kind of like a system of stages of devotion. That's something that various Vaishnava traditions, of course, will elaborate on during the centuries and offer often many quite detailed descriptions of. At the same time, it seems these descriptions often seem to be a little bit artificial, in the sense that when we look at the life stories of saints and so on, they do follow the same basic idea that they serve the devotees, they hear, they get purified, and so on. But things tend to happen in often surprising ways. So,
Yes, so there's some leap.
Yes, there's some leap
there's
as
a
well.
leap element. Yeah, like Narada. Narada is sort of the model of becoming qualified. What does he do? He serves the sadhus.
Bhakti Vedantas, Prabhupada says.
The Bhakti Vedantas, and then he loses his mother and so on. And then what happens? Suddenly he's wandering, he meets the Lord, reveals himself and says, I'm not going to, that's it, won't see me again in this life. But at the end of his life, he makes a big leap. Or Dhruva, he does this super, turbo austerity, and then boom, suddenly the Lord appears to him and bumps him on the head with his conch. One other thing which maybe you would like to speak about, I've noticed later in this chapter some verses which, how to put this, I think they're just the thing for you to talk about, because you wrote this nice article, which we included in our book, about the Bhagavatam's outsiders, heterodoxy and so on. So, for example, verse 26, those who are serious about liberation are certainly non-envious, and they respect all, yet they reject the horrible and ghastly forms of the demigods and worship only the all-blissful forms of Lord Vishnu and his plenary portions. So I said before, the Bhagavatam is very Catholic, it's very inclusive, but it has its boundaries, doesn't it?
Yes, indeed it does. I thought about that verse, mentions these Ghora Rupan, terrible forms.
Yeah.
And I guess the context here is again explaining what this supreme truth is. And I think maybe 2 verses back, it said that the supreme manifests through the gunas as Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu.
Yes.
But those who are situated in sattva, they worship Vishnu alone.
Right.
And then, of course, the Bhagavatam is going to go from sattva to Shuddha sattva, to unalloyed, I guess Prabhupada would say, unalloyed goodness.
Mm.
And so I think these Ghora Rupan, they refer probably to terrible forms of Shiva, for example, that might be attractive to other people. I was just yesterday, I was reading in Tulsidas Ramcharitmanas of Shiva's and Parvati's wedding. And when Shiva comes to the wedding, he comes there together with all of his associates, these ghosts and hobgoblins and others. And that was just by Tulsidas in a very funny and humorous way, how people who saw this procession, the children got scared and they ran up to their mummies crying that some terrible monsters are coming. But of course, he was describing it with relish and felt that these forms were beautiful because they were connected with Shiva. But for the Bhagavatam, this is kind of the outsiders.
Yes.
Shiva, of course, is a very important person in the Bhagavatam, and the Bhagavatam much to say about him. But these kind of scary forms of Shiva, they will not be in the center. Rather, it will be Shiva as suspicious. That will be the closest that we get to the various forms of Krishna or Vishnu.
And then we have verses 28 and 29, which kind of hammer on the supremacy of Vasudeva. Vasudeva para Veda, Vasudeva para Makaha, Vasudeva para Yoga, Vasudeva para Kriya, Vasudeva para Jnanam, Vasudeva para Tapa, Vasudeva para Dharma, Vasudeva para Gati. It's kind of song. You can also almost imagine, it could be chanted while going on pilgrimage or something.
Yes, and I think in Prabhupada's Bhagavatam, of course, begins with this invocation, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, which is a classic Vaishnava mantra. But I think in the Bhagavatam, the word, and it's the mantra that Narada is going to give Dhruva as well. So it's a mantra that is explicitly part of the Bhagavatam. But I think one of the reasons for why this mantra is important in the Bhagavatam is the double meaning of the word Vasudeva. Vasudeva being, of course, one of the Chaturvyuhas, one of the 4 emanations. but Vasudeva also being a patronymic of Krishna, the son of Vasudeva.
Right.
And this is, of course, an important point that Prabhupada is making in his commentary as well, that this book really is not just about some vague form of the Absolute, but really is about Krishna,
Yes.
the Supreme Personality, Godhead.
And in his translation of this verse, although it repeats Vasudeva 4 times, Srila Prabhupada's translation is, in the revealed scriptures, the ultimate object of knowledge is Sri Krishna.
So
he wants to...
Yes. Thank you, Maharaj, for this discussion. This has been very pleasant.
My thanks to you.
I've learned so many things. I hope that you will come back for more chapters later on. But
I look forward to it. Yes, and I think this is a very nice way of discussing Bhagavatam, and I think it'll be attractive for our audience, and hopefully inspire people to read the Bhagavatam.
Thank you. You've certainly inspired me. Thank you.
Thank you.